let us now, weather, health, dangers, public orders, and other circumstances permitting, of perfectly convenient, if you police, after you, police, pardoning mine, ich bin so fresh, by. Drop this jiggery pokey and talk straight turkey, meat to mate. For while the ears, be we Michaels or Nicholasts, may sometimes be inclined to believe others, the eyes, whether Brown or Nolan's, find it devilish hard now and again even to believe itself.
The National Endowment for the Arts.
Habes ores et num videbis, habes oculos ac mane palpabula.
The Illinois Arts Council. School sponsorship members, Chicago Musical College of Roosevelt
Drawing nearer
University,
to take our slant at it,
Northwestern
since
University,
after all it has met with
and others.
misfortune, while all underground.
Trinidad,
Let us see all
and the big
that remains to
Mississippi,
be
and
seen.
the pound on the Lulu, and the big Titicaca.
Patrons,
Isn't it in Canada?
Mrs. Bergen Evans, Mr. and Mrs. Bertrand Goldberg, Mr. and Mrs. Paul
On
M.
October the 4th,
Corbett,
1970,
Mr. and Mrs.
the United
E. P.
States Weather
Malloy,
Bureau of Fisheries, the oceanographic research activities of the federal
supporting
government,
members,
and several other minor
Dr. Aaron
bureaucracies
DeCrossens,
were absorbed into the
Mr. and Mrs.
super
W. H.
agency
Cornell,
called the National Oceanic
Mr. and Mrs. Ralph
Atmospheric
A. Bard,
Administration,
Jr., Mr.
NOAA.
William W. McKittrick, Mr. and Mrs. Ralph G. McGee, Mr. Chauncey L. Griffith, Mrs. F. N. Bard, Mrs. Milton H. Cohen,
Two contemporary concerts
Mrs.
from
Charles
Enough
Daniel
Rope,
Pratt,
September
Mr.
23rd,
Martin
1970. Subject,
Mrs. A. R.
Guarantee.
Martin, Mr. Earl Ludgin,
At today's meeting of Enough
Mrs.
Rope,
C.
Inc.,
Russell,
those members present agreed to offer the
Sherman
following
Sexton.
guarantee to those attending the
Mrs.
two
Henry S.
presentations at the
Monroe.
Museum of Contemporary Art,
Mr. Max
November 20th and
Benarroyo,
21st, 1970.
Mr. and Mrs. Albert H.
And to
Newman.
cause it to be circulated with a priority of 3,
With a
all verbal material composed hereafter.
Regular members,
Guarantee.
Mrs. Arthur Struble,
All parts
Mr. and
fully
Mrs. Carmen
guaranteed
Nova,
against defects in
Mr. and
materials
Mrs.
and
Leo L.
workmanship.
Roberg, Mr. and
Packed
Mrs. Fred
as full as
Muller,
practicable by modern
Mrs.
equipment,
David Mayer,
this package and its contents
and
will
Mrs.
supply
Joseph
100% of
Mrs.
an adult's
Irene
minimum
Smith,
daily requirement,
Mrs.
MDR.
Paroda D. Toms,
If
Mrs.
it does not
Stuart
appear
S.
full
Bell,
when opened, it
Mrs.
is
J.
because
Stein,
contents may settle during
Mrs.
shipping and
James A.
handling.
Cunningham, Dr. Felix Gantz,
To preserve product
Mr. and
freshness,
Mrs. Frank
an
P. Rogers,
antioxidant,
Jr.,
MHK, has been added. Enough Rope Inc. reserves the right to make changes in design and improvements upon its product, without any obligation to install these changes upon any of its products or events theretofore manufactured or presented. This guarantee is in lieu of all others, expressed or implied.
Contemporary Concerts Incorporated, National Endowment for the Arts, the Illinois Arts Council, school sponsorship members, Chicago Musical College of Roosevelt University, Northwestern University, and others. Patrons: Mrs. Bergen Evans, Mr. and Mrs. Bertrand Goldberg, Mr. and Mrs. Paul M. Corbett,
Art is
Mr. and Mrs. E.
as
P.
art
Malloy.
does. All products must take into consideration
Supporting members: Dr. Aaron Parsons, Mr. and Mrs. W.H. Cornell, Mr. and Mrs. Ralph A. Bard, Jr., Mr. William W. Kipling, Mr. and Mrs. Ralph G. McGee, Mr. Chauncey L. Griffith, Mrs. F. N. Bard, Mrs. Milton H. Cohen, Mrs. Charles Daniel Fromm, Mr. Martin Cassell, Mrs. A. R. Martin, Mr. Earl Lubkin, Mrs. C. Russell, Mrs. Sherman Sexton, Mrs. Henry S. Monroe, Mr. Max Benaroyo, Mr. and Mrs. Albert H. Newman.
Memo from Enough Road Inn to the publicity spokesman. In your dispatches and other material for the print and broadcast media, please bear in mind that the following words are used in various designative senses during the evening. Applicate, pre-diluvian, arboreal, exiguous, synergetical, synecthrous, boanthropy, theriophilism,
Regular Mrs. Arthur Student,
articulated,
Mr. and Mrs. Cook, Mr. and Mrs. Leo L. Roberg,
opnemonesis,
Mr. and Mrs. Fred Mann,
anacoinosis,
Mrs. David Mayer,
synecdoche,
Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Estes,
tapinosis,
Mrs. Irene B. Smith,
apostatization,
Mrs. Paroda D. Khan,
tulips,
Mrs. Stuart S. Bell, Mrs. J. Stein, Mrs. James A. Cunningham, Dr. Felix Gons, Mr. and Mrs. Frank P. Rogers,